The Revolution of February 1917 brought panic to an already unstable country. The Tsar was unable to improve country conditions and was forced to give up his throne. General Kerensky formed a new government, became a leader of a new temporary government. The old money was abolished and the new Kerensky currency was printed. Inflation reached 1,000%. In a couple of months, a box of matches was worth 1,000,000 Kerensky. Some wealthy people ran away to other countries just in time to preserve their capital. But the ones that stayed turned into beggars. Moshe's extended family invited Riva to come with them to Canada, but Riva couldn't leave. She didn't have enough money to leave, and above all, she hoped for her husband's return. A few weeks later, Riva received a letter from the military committee. She felt a dull pain in her stomach as she read that because her husband had disappeared during the war, they terminated the compensation. Your husband, Mrs. Liba, is suspected of treason, a committee bureaucrat said while biting on a juicy chicken leg, arrogantly looking at Riva. That's impossible. Riva tried to stay calm. My husband was always loyal to the Tsar. He's a patriot of our country. Oh, please. What are you talking about? The bureaucrat swallowed the last piece. How can he possibly be a patriot of my country if he's Jewish? He sneered, licking his fingers. Riva stood still, not knowing what to say as the bureaucrat wiped his fat hands and puffy lips off with a cloth. Anyway, nobody had seen his dead body. Nobody had seen him captured by the Japanese. He just disappeared. Ran away, he said, gesturing with his hands. That's not true. He couldn't run away from his family, Riva argued, gladly finding a response. This conversation is going nowhere. I'm sorry, but I can't do anything for you. You should leave. The bureaucrat then waved her off to the door. My husband is an officer of the Tsar's army. Riva tried to talk as politely as possible. He earned a medal for heroism and you can't leave his children and wife without any pension. If nobody saw his dead body, it doesn't mean that he ran away. Did anybody see him running away? Mrs. Liba, our meeting is over, the bureaucrat said, looking over her head. Guard, show the lady to the door. The guard came to Riva and put his hand on her shoulder. Don't you touch me with your dirty typhus hands. Riva shouted with anger. There was nothing she could fear now. You fat swine. Her tone grew in defiance. From now on, every time you eat your chicken, you'll remember me. I curse you to choke slowly on a bone within that meat. The entrance of your pitiful soul into hell will be painful and tortuous, she angrily chanted in Hebrew. The bureaucrat's face turned pale and drenched with sweat as his jaw dropped. He would remember Riva for the rest of his life, carefully picking the bones out of every chicken he ate. Riva returned home, sat on the front porch, and cried. She knew that she had to find a job and leave her children home with the nanny. Mary was a good nanny. But that wasn't the life Riva had planned to lead. She'd planned to educate her children, giving them all her knowledge and spirit. She knew she wasn't able to do that because she had to go to work to earn money to survive. She cried because of the uncertainty of finding a job at that terrible time. She stepped out of the door and headed to the military committee again. For a couple of weeks, Riva went to different offices trying to get some compensation for her lost husband but couldn't break the impenetrable wall of bureaucracy. There was a reason for this. The country had fallen into bankruptcy and sunk in a civil war. The temporary government didn't subsidize the military committee and looked for any reason to terminate the compensation. Riva ran out of money and didn't have anyone to ask for help or advice. Every family either had a deceased member while serving in the war or because of typhus. Riva knew that no one in the world would help her. She thought of asking Isaac for help, but didn't feel comfortable asking a man who'd recently lost his wife. Thoughts of betrayal unintentionally came to her mind. If I visit him, maybe he'll make a move on me, she thought, because she knew he might. Isaac is a very attractive man, and he invited me to his house. I know he's interested in me. When he looked at her, her heart beat faster and her cheeks turned red. I'm not sure if I still have to play the role of the devoted wife. I'm on my own. My situation is terrible. And that was true. Moshe has been gone for so long. A sudden memory of her husband cast a look of gloom over her face. She drove away the memory. How long do I have to wait? I already forgot how it feels to be a wife. Years without a touch, without a kiss. And my last hope melts every day of my life. Tears filled her eyes. Who can blame me? Nobody. I need a father for my children. Oh God, what am I thinking of? God, please forgive me. Riva left home very early in the morning, worked long hours, and came back home very late. She usually took her students' homework home and checked it, staying up late. One day, Riva came home from work as usual. She opened the front door and heard a man's soft, deep voice. Her heart skipped a beat. Moshe, she cried. She dropped the books and ran to the family room. Moshe. She stopped in the middle of the room. To her disappointment, there was no Moshe there. It was Isaac. He sat down on the sofa, reading a book to her children. Isaac put the book aside. Hello, Riva. His soft voice and charming smile could break any woman's heart. But also, Riva noticed something that she hadn't seen before. There was a cynical look under that illusion of a smile. It felt like she was looking at one of the bureaucrats that she'd spoken to, though it was just for a moment. His soft voice and hope for help that he could provide blocked her mind. I decided to visit you, Riva, to find out how you're doing. He got up from the sofa and noticed Riva's cheeks turning pink. Hello, Isaac, she replied, avoiding eye contact with him. Children. I'll finish the book some other time. You can go to your nanny. The children left the room. He turned back to Riva. You weren't home. The nanny said that you were going to be home soon, so I've decided to wait for you. I hope you don't mind. I read a book to your children while I waited. You have a good children's book collection, by the way. He behaved as if he lived in this house, and Riva was standing there as if she was a guest. A memory suddenly flashed into her mind. She still remembered how he'd held her hand with his hands, and the memory of that incredible feeling turned her mind off. What did he say? She thought with alarm. Oh, not at all. Thank you, she said, fluttering after a long pause. She briefly glanced into his eyes. Your nanny told me that you were at work. You work? Isaac asked, making a step toward Riva. Yes, I do, she replied. What's this? A new revolutionary view of life? Equality between a man and a woman? He took another step. No, it's not. I work to make money. Riva stepped back. She felt terrible. It was so humiliating to admit that she was in need. Oh, come on. Tell me you're doing it for fun. School, children? Isaac laughed. No. Unfortunately, I'm not doing it for fun. Riva's tone was strong as she took a final step back against the wall. Why? Is Moshe's compensation not enough for you? Now he was standing very close to her. I don't get any compensation. Riva was trembling. He moved back a little as this news didn't match his plan. Riva, did I do something wrong? You always avoid looking at me. I always respected you. I'm your friend. He took her hand into his and gently squeezed it. We've known each other for years. And you always avoid looking into my eyes. Riva felt guilty about that comment. She looked at Isaac. He was so striking. His light, adorable smile made her tremble. Oh, it felt so good. When he held her so gently and warmly, she had forgotten the smell and touch of a man. Yet, somewhere inside, a voice told her that all this touching and talking was fake. But her heartbeat was so strong that the voice wasn't heard. She didn't know what was happening to her. But Isaac did. He knew how to play the game. He had always enjoyed seeing the change on women's faces. It made him feel strong and confident. He believed that, in the whole world, no woman could say no to him. He knew that Riva was waiting for his move. He was planning to make it, but now that he found out that she didn't get any compensation for Moshe, he wasn't sure if he wanted her. He needed a mother for his children, but he also needed this woman for her wealth. He didn't want to take a woman with 4 children and no money at all. He still hoped that Riva's situation wasn't too bad. He knew that he could always say no, but in the meantime, he needed more information. He was in no rush. And always took his time when talking to women. I'm not avoiding you, Isaac, Riva said, wretchedly smiling. He gently pulled her to the sofa. She was going to say something, but he didn't give her a chance. You promised to visit us, but you never did. Do you remember how our children played together? I don't understand why you don't like me. In Jeannie's respect, you don't have to let our children forget each other. Riva felt bad and guilty, and she started to apologize and excuse herself. Oh Isaac, I don't know why you think I don't like you. I do. When she realized what she'd said, Riva suddenly became more nervous, making the situation even worse for her. However, after managing to pull herself together, she continued. I'm so busy. You can't imagine. I stopped getting Moshe's compensation several months ago and had to make money myself. I have so many problems that I just don't have time for anything at all. Riva revealed all her problems to Isaac. It felt good to have somebody listening to her. She cried, complaining about her situation. She told him her sad story, hoping for some help. At the end of her story, she suddenly realized that he wasn't holding her hand anymore. Isaac was no longer on the sofa with her, and was instead standing near the window. He listened, looking into her eyes, but not like he did before. His charming smile had vanished. Suddenly, Riva wasn't talking to the man she knew before but to a bureaucrat that had denied her husband's compensation. My God, she thought, who am I talking to? Why have I told him all this? You have to be strong, Riva, Isaac said, looking out the window. Nobody saw Moshe die. He'll be back and everything will be back to normal. With that, he abruptly left. Riva stood at the door Isaac had just exited from. She was smart enough to understand what had happened. She just didn't have enough experience dealing with people. Suddenly, all the warm feelings and hope she'd had for him turned into a huge wave of anger and hate. Then, her fingers touched her collar and felt the 2 solid bumps embedded in it. It made her believe in herself and her future. Thank God I still have them, she thought, and smiled. Terrible news was coming from the army, but there was no news from Moshe. Nevertheless, Riva never stopped hoping for his return. Somehow, deep inside she knew he was alive. Further bad news about the government instability was reaching the small town of Israelivka. Deep inside, Riva knew that the worst was still to come. The Kerensky party fell apart into several coalitions, and they fought for leadership to death. The most powerful coalition, the Communist Party, under the leadership of Lenin, represented peasants, workers and soldiers. In other words, it represented millions of angry people doomed to poverty and starvation. Lenin benefited from the conflict in the Kerensky Party and led these people to the bloody October Communist Revolution that turned the already unstable life in Russia upside down. The October Revolution brought the First World War to an end, though it also became a reason for the civil war that raged, and more blood was spilled. People divided into two major groups: the Whites and the Reds. The majority of the Reds were workers, peasants, and soldiers. The Whites were mostly wealthy aristocrats, former Tsar army officers, and a major portion of the intelligent citizens of Russia. Also, it was often the case that members of the same family didn't share their ideas and the conflict ended up with a murder. Neighbors killed each other, sons killed fathers, and brothers killed brothers. Blood washed over the country like a flood over a small town. It was impossible to be neutral. It was also dangerous to belong to any party. Riva had to survive in this bloody kettle. She had her job, the house, and the diamonds, yet, she never felt safe. She had a terrible feeling about the imminent future. And a gruesome soreness in her stomach made her soul cringe. Those feelings never left her, so she wore her black dress that bore a sense of protection. She wore that dress every day. Riva often heard shooting outside at nighttime very often, and when it happened, she put out the candle and waited in fear till it was over. One of those nights, Riva sat at her desk as usual, checking her students' homework. As she heard shooting, she put out the candle and rushed to the children's room, where the nanny was preparing them for bed. "Children, quiet," Riva whispered, putting out the candle in their room. The children jumped to their beds and hid under the blankets. Riva took the nanny's hand and the two women waited in silence. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. They startled and didn't move. When the knocking repeated, the nanny stood up. "Do you want me to open the door, madam?" "No, Maria. I'll do it." Riva walked to the front door. "Who is this?" "This is Officer Parov. Please, open the door." Riva hesitated. Officer Parov sounded familiar. She just couldn't remember. What does he want at such a late hour, she wondered. "Who are you looking for?" Riva asked. "Please, let me in. I'm Officer Liba's friend," the voice said. Mentioning her husband's name worked like magic. Riva opened the door and let the stranger in. He stepped in briskly. "Hello, Mrs. Liba," he said, "I need shelter. The Reds are after me. I won't stay long. I'll leave as soon as they go away." Riva hesitated. "Mr. Parov, I thought that you brought back some news about my husband." She looked at the officer with hope. "No, I didn't. I'm sorry," he said. However, he wasn't sorry. He was scared and tired of being chased. "Mr. Parov, I don't think it's a good idea for you to stay in my house. I have 4 children here. You can't risk my life and the life of my children. Please, hide somewhere else. I want you to leave." "Mrs. Liba, I have to remind you that your husband, the father of your children, is a Tsar army officer. You have to be loyal to our Tsar and support the Tsar army officers. Where is your pride, Mrs. Liba?" Parov looked at Riva with reproach. Riva got mad. "My pride? You're asking me about my pride? I'll tell you about my pride." She was steaming with anger. "It's in the same place where the pension for my husband is, for his loyalty to the Tsar, for his life that he gave up for the Tsar. Now, get out of my house or I'll turn you over to the Reds. I can't leave now. They're looking for me. If I leave now, they'll send me directly to hell. You have no choice but let me stay." I still can't believe that this hateful crook, Parov, got a medal for bravery. He's the biggest coward in the whole world. Riva suddenly recalled what Moshe told her before he left to the war. "How could I forget?" she thought with distress. "I don't care," Riva said, raising her voice. "Get out of my house. Now." She was almost yelling. Suddenly, Parov drew a gun from his pocket and pointed it at Riva's head. "Shut up, you dirty Jew," he said in low voice. "If I go to hell, I'm taking all of you with me." Riva froze. "Now, sit down on the sofa and keep your mouth shut. Understood?" She nodded in fear. Parav left half an hour later, when it became quiet outside. Riva trembled, covering her face with her hands, and cried. "Don't cry, Mommy." Hannah tried to cheer her up. The bad man left. "Everything is going to be all right. Everything is going to be all right," Riva repeated and kept crying. She cried for being so helpless and scared to live this life that it became more and more dangerous every day. Anyone could hurt her. Private Jewish school lost a lot of its students because people couldn't afford it anymore. Therefore, the schools made the classes bigger and got rid of some teachers. They kept Riva because she was the best. She performed more work, for the same pay that was constantly being devalued due to inflation. Also, Riva watched as the number of children attending her class decreased every day, leaving her in constant fear of losing her job. The communist revolution took more and more power in the small town of Israelivka, bringing new rules and causing more problems for Riva. She came to the school one day as usual, having checked her students' homework. To her alarm, all the students and teachers were outside. Men with rifles and gray hats that had red five-edged stars fused on them didn't let anybody in. They ran around, yelled, and pushed everyone out of the school. These men were the new communist government and they called themselves the Red Army. They were closing the Jewish school. No private religious schools were permitted anymore. From that day on, all schools had to be public. Riva had lost her job. Riva approached one of the men, attempting to find out the situation. "Excuse me, Mr. You bourgeoisie. I'm a comrade." "Oh, sorry, Mr. Comrade," Riva tried again. "I told you not to call me Mr., you son of a..." He pushed Riva and walked away. Riva walked from one school to another, showing them her beautiful diploma, but no one was interested in a foreign language teacher. No one wanted to take music lessons. And no one was attracted by Jewish history. The new science of Marxism-Leninism was now in style, and that science ruled over all the other sciences in the world. The nanny left Riva because Riva couldn't feed her anymore. Riva was continually looking for a job, while her children stayed home alone. Although there were no jobs available, Riva sold clothing and furniture, all she could, to buy some food, but ran out of money very soon. She still had her house and hoped that, if she sold it, she would survive. But where would I live? She thought with distress. And how much would I gain from it anyway? Where do I find a buyer? She had too many questions and no answers, but also she didn't have a choice. A house for sale sign was standing outside, but didn't yield a response. Riva didn't know yet that one of the new rules of communistic theory was that everything belonged to people and that each person couldn't own anything individually. In other words, the house wasn't Riva's anymore, it belonged to people. A loud knock on the door at 7 in the morning woke her up. She answered the door to find 3 Red Army soldiers standing at her doorsteps. They came in without permission. "How can I help you?" Riva asked as the familiar pain in her stomach burned again. "We don't need any help," one of them rudely answered. They walked around the house checking every room, like looking for something. "Are you Riva, Liba?" "Yes." "Was your husband a Tsar army officer?" "Yes." Blood pounded through her temples. My God. Did they find him? She hoped. She didn't know what to expect. As per the Communist Party resolution, the house of the former White Army officer is to be confiscated and passed to the worker-peasant authority. "So, bourgeoisie Liba, you have 24 hours to leave this property," he said coldly. Riva was shocked. What do you mean?" she asked, stuttering. I mean that you have 24 hours to leave the house, he repeated slowly, distinctly pronouncing every word. Which part of that don't you understand? Where would I go? I have 4 children. No job, no money. You can't throw us on the street, she frightfully whispered as her mouth dried out. Oh yes we can. Another man said with anger. Did you care about my mother when she didn't have place to live? Now, we're ruling the world. All people are equal. You'll live as everybody else. Understood? I didn't do anything bad to your mother. Riva called out in terror. I don't even know your mother. Don't get angry at me, please. Riva tried her best not to call him Mr. And it was very difficult for her. She tried to say something nice to him, but didn't know what. She didn't know the words this new government used to ask for help. Nor did she know how to apologize or thank. She already knew that her education irritated people, her smile made them mad, and her tears made them spiteful. However, there was no rule on how to make people sympathetic. Please, just tell me what to do. I have 4 small children. Ask your questions to the Communist Committee, the man said, looking into her eyes and enjoying the fear on her face. On their way out, they removed the sign from the ground and smashed it. By the way, the new building of the Communist Committee is on 5 Main Street, the youngest man said, waving to Riva. Thanks. 5 Main Street is Isaac's address, Riva thought. There's probably some mistake. However, there was no mistake. When Riva approached Isaac's house, she realized that Isaac and his children didn't live there anymore. This house was the most attractive house in town, a couple of months ago. Now, it looked completely different. The windows were wide open and dirty blinds hung from them. The entire front yard was filled with trash and broken furniture. The dirty walkway was covered with cigarette butts, broken wine bottles, and other trash. People ran in and out, yelling and cursing. It felt as if she was in the middle of a pack of fierce dogs. Riva went inside. The carpet was covered with leftover food, spits, cigarette butts, and ash. It was hard to breathe. The house was filled with cigarette smoke and stunk badly. Several men stood near the window, laughing, cursing, and eating, wiping their dirty faces and hands with the window curtains. Isaac's desk stood right in the middle of the corridor and a man sat at it, writing a document and smoking. Several people formed a line in front of the desk, impatiently waiting for their turn. Riva took her place in the line and waited. When it was her turn, she approached the man sitting at the front desk. What's the matter? The man asked, extinguishing his cigarette on the desk. Riva couldn't turn her eyes from the desk. It was covered with black spots because he put out cigarettes on it. Comrade, what's the matter? The man asked again. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a single mother of 4 children and I don't have a place to live. Riva spent all day in the Communist Committee's house, trying to get the answer to her question. She came back home with permission to occupy 1 room in her own house. She opened the front door, not yet realizing that it was the last time she would enter her house. From now on, the word mine was replaced with ours. Nothing belonged to her anymore. A man's voice from the family room stopped her at the door. Isaac? What does he want? What would I tell him? She stood there, trying to figure out the reason for him being there, or maybe it wasn't Isaac. She couldn't recognize the voice. She didn't expect anything good from this late visitor anyway. She walked into the living room, but there was no Isaac there. There was a strange man surrounded by her children sitting on the sofa. Riva was afraid to move or to say anything. She had no idea what to expect from the stranger. She was prepared for the worst. The man looked at her and uttered, Riva. Suddenly, a cry escaped her mouth like the sound of a wounded animal. And she fell unconscious. It was Moshe.